Hello, everyone. This is Ilan, and I'm here with my friend John, and we are here for our new edition of our podcast. So, me and John are friends from Hanoi. I'm American, and he's Irish. We come at things from a bit of a different perspective due to the difference in our background and also our interests. I'm more interested in the government side of things, and he's more interested in the scientific side of things. But our interests overlap, and when we lived together, we used to get into a lot of deep, long conversations about a variety of topics, from big philosophical questions to little arguments. But we'd always try to use our differences and our different perspectives to help guide us towards a common shared understanding. And that's what we're trying to do here with this podcast. And we want this conversation to be not just about us, but about anyone else who's interested in talking about different things, maybe things that aren't being talked about generally, or we are free to talk about anything. We love to just chat. So if you're interested, leave a comment leave a comment below, or let us know if there's anything else you want us to cover, and we'll get to it. So for this week, we want to start by talking about something that's kind of been in the news, but is something we want to talk about more, and that's this idea of anti-racism. So, John, what does this idea of anti-racism mean to you?
Um, well, I I suppose from one of the problems that I see a lot uh, in the telling of stories and events that have happened to people is when events have been distorted or misrepresented in some way. I think I sent you a video a week or two ago of it was the Young Turks, and they put up a video from at least a year or 2 years ago where cops were the cops were absolutely in the wrong from what I saw in the video, but they essentially attacked teenagers because they were black. All the teenagers were middle class. They were in their own neighborhood, as far as I'm aware.
I think it was a pool party of some kinds.
It was a pool party. That's right. Yeah. And like they were in their local neighborhood. And yeah, for all intents and purposes, they belonged there, for want of a better word. And two racist white people called the cops on them, and the cops didn't even question it. They were just like on those black kids. And it culminated with one of the guys attacking a 15-year-old girl, pinning her to the ground. I think he pulled his taser on somebody. He didn't actually fire it, but I mean, these kids did nothing. Like, they were standing there looking at him. And obviously that's a terrible event, and I hope the cop lost his job over it. But the part of it that we're discussing is that happened a couple of years ago. And in the description that the Young Turks video put together, it was suggesting that it had happened just now. It wasn't an old video, like, you know, it wasn't a video dated from 2016 or anything like that. It was uploaded as a recent event, and obviously that is wrong as well. So yeah, that's kind of. So I just wanted to draw attention to the people out there that are distorting the facts, the damage that it can do, like how it can make people more polarized, and you can go more into fuck the police, or you can go more into the media are all liars, because one liar in the media is enough to sow distrust among them. So, you know, they need to be careful with how they talk. And to be honest now, like from the the Young Turks are probably among the worst offenders. If I think of like Breitbart on the far right, I think the Young Turks is the anti-Breitbart. So yeah, that's kind of what I'd like to talk
Right.
about.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is kind of misrepresentation of facts to fit a narrative. And that definitely
Absolutely,
happens
yeah.
on both sides, like you said, the Young Turks pulling a video from, I think it was 2017. I remember when this came out, and trying to pass it off as a recent thing. And the thing is that the irony of that is that it shouldn't matter when that video came out. Like, all they'd had to say was, look at this video from 2017. It's still an example of exactly what you're trying to point out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would disagree that the police officer in that video went over the line. Also, I think we should share this video in the description for this podcast
Right.
episode. We'll share the video. But yeah, I don't think most people would disagree that the police officer did something wrong or went over the line. Um, but there was no need to misrepresent the year that came out in, and yet they did it anyway. And it's the sort of casual disregard of such a simple fact that is kind of disheartening and really undermines what they're trying to do. You know?
Um, yeah, I have the video here if you want to watch it.
Yeah. Maybe just a
No?
quick,
Let me just link
maybe a
it.
portion. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. Yeah, because it is actually a long video.
Yeah.
Um, so this is the original. So this is from 2015, actually.
2015. Okay. Yeah. So there he is talking about it. Does it cut to the video?
Say that again.
Does it cut
It,
to
it
the
does it it does cut to the video. I just skipped to the start of that. Yeah, we shouldn't give this dickhead any more
uh
time than.
yeah, let's just try to get to the action.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, so there's the officers chasing after. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that clip doesn't even, what we just saw doesn't even show the real hectic. Because there's, I think, a point where he goes up to a girl, this like teenage girl in a bikini, and just throws her on the ground.
Yeah, I've got that here as well. 1 second.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Does it have sound by any chance?
Can you not hear that?
No.
Crap. Ah, fuck. Maybe we should just link it in the video.
Yeah, well, we can link it. But yeah, so basically,
Okay.
the girl is sitting on the ground, I think, and the police officer comes up and he just takes her down.
Just slams her onto the ground,
Yeah, yeah,
bends her arm right up behind her back.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And it is an example, I think, of overuse of force. It's not a tragic someone died example that
yeah.
we've been seeing a lot of.
But it shouldn't need to be in order to reach a certain level of outrage.
Exactly,
It shouldn't need to.
it's still outrageous. That's the thing, and it is definitely an example of police use of unnecessary force, especially white officer against a black girl. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But
yeah,
there's enough examples in the last month or two,
yeah, yeah,
like however far you want to go back,
yep.
you can find enough
As
examples.
long as there's
Um,
been cell phone videos, there's been
yeah,
examples.
yeah, you can kind of tell that in that clip as well, that the camera is just that little bit worse. It's
Yeah,
not a recent video.
yeah,
But yeah, like I would have absolute disdain for anybody that would lie about um, in the media anyway.
so do you
Anybody who would lie. Sorry,
so
go on.
do you feel like because of this growing awareness um, of racist behavior and racist institutions and sort of discrimination against black people, do you think that there have been some people who are kind of distorting the historical narrative to suit their narrative?
Yeah, I think there have always been um, people who will. If anytime there's something that's not acceptable to some and acceptable to others, you'll have people trying to manipulate one against the other. Um, Obviously, the vast majority of people now find racism unacceptable. There was a time that it was more acceptable. Um, uh, my uncle lived in Manchester for a while, and like he's absolutely not racist. And he, uh, he, some guy bumped into, I think his girlfriend or one of his friends or something, bumped into her and started giving out to her, and he defended her, just verbally, like it didn't go beyond that. But your man started accusing him of being racist because he was telling your man to, like, oh, man, just fuck off, like, it's like there's no way an a decent person could have found it racist. He didn't say anything inappropriate. He didn't even call him black. You know, there was nothing to it. Um, but and your man just went. He went for, uh, oh, you're racist, because he felt it would be intimidating to my uncle. My uncle wasn't. He was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Get the fuck out of here." Um, but I think a lot of people, probably even the majority of people, would be uncomfortable enough with being called a racist that whatever argument they had up until that point would evaporate. I don't know if that's true. Maybe that's like, um, maybe that's because I would
Yeah,
feel that uncomfortable. Like,
yeah, definitely.
I would stand up for myself, but it would make it a hell of a lot more uh, uncomfortable if somebody had accused me of being a racist.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and that's kind of another thing about racism, which I think people have been talking about more recently, and which we kind of talked about last week a little bit, is that basically everybody in modern society has some kind of racial bias built into their psyche or built into their maybe unconsciousness, right? So it may come out in ways that you don't even realize, which is something I realized when I was working in an organization that was doing implicit bias training, and you learn to kind of question your initial impulses because you realize that you do have these kind of thoughts, or even your emotions might change, right? So if and it might also be a fear of coming across as racism, right? Like, you don't want to act in a way which would offend someone, but that in turn makes you act differently towards the person, right? And there's all these different ways in which racism kind of plays a tiny role in our decisions and our actions and how we treat people that I think we don't even realize. And um, it's like in some cases when the racism card is pointed out, like in your uncle's case, that's just a way to dismiss what that person is saying, right? But I think, for example, like in the Amy Cooper video, that's been like a huge video recently, where the black guy is bird watching, and he's asking this white woman, please, this is an area that's supposed to be without dogs because it's for bird watching, blah, blah, blah. And she threatens to call the police on him. And she kind of says like, oh, like when she's on the phone with them, she's like, I have a black man here, or an African American man here who's threatening me. And it's because she knows exactly what that will do, saying that,
Yeah.
right? And so that was an instance where it had to be called out, right? Because this woman, a lot of research went into who is this woman, like why would she do this thing? Like this woman was liberal.
She knew exactly what she was at.
Number one, she knew what she was doing, but she was like liberal, like supported different like liberal causes and Democrats, and those aren't things which make you not a racist, right? Like the way she acted
it's
racist.
kind of ridiculous.
And
it's kind of like I have a black friend.
Right. Well, that's ridiculous.
I'm liberal,
Yeah, no. It's absolutely ridiculous that people use that as kind of a crutch to prove that they're not racist. But there definitely, I think, there are subconscious things that we probably do without even knowing, and that probably need to be called out. And I think that people calling those out is good for us, because it lets us see, oh my God, like I actually did something which made someone uncomfortable, and I need to take a look at that, And I think we should welcome that as people, and in any kind of dispute, people have their viewpoint of what happened, right? In any kind of negative interaction, we saw things differently, which is why there's this miscommunication and why there's this tension, right?
And to be fair, that's absolutely unavoidable, because she might have, like she was probably aware, but it is actually possible that she was unaware when she said those words, because when a black man hears those words, he's like, these cops are going to come down heavy, because he knows what an interaction with a cop is like. Whereas for a white woman who's probably never fucking been stopped by the cops in her life, like even like white guys versus white girls, white guys have far more unpleasant interactions with cops, I think, than white girls. So like to go from a white girl all the way down to a black guy in terms of cop interactions, there's a whole load of other categories in there. Like, there's like black women and there's white guys before you get to white women. Like,
well, and the thing is, she probably didn't realize to some extent, and she probably doesn't think of herself as a racist, right? Like but then why
she was almost certainly not planning on him getting shot at the end of that, like,
No, but at the same time, why would she say there's a black man here? Like even if you don't acknowledge it, that there's a difference in how black people are treated by the police and white people are treated by the police.
Yeah,
right?
No, sorry. What I was saying was she was almost certainly saying there's a black man here threatening me, like checking boxes, right? I'm not saying she wasn't doing that. What I'm saying is that because her outlook on life, or her perspective in life, is different from his, it wasn't as much of a threat to her. She knew that she was,
but
by the time the cops arrived, she was going to be in.
She might not have done that on purpose, but this is what I'm saying. Subconsciously, she used that power, right? Like she felt the need to say, this is a black man, and she might not have thought it through that, like, this is going to get this on the radar, but subconsciously that's what she was doing.
Did you hear about?
Yeah. What were you saying?
Did you hear about the so there was an incident there. I think it was just during the week, or I only heard about it yesterday or the day before anyway. So I imagine it was within the last week. So not speaking about cars, what does tailgating mean to you?
Tailgating means there's some kind of event and you go to the parking lot and you have
Oh no,
kind of like a
no,
barbecue
no,
and
no! It's a
no.
different one. It's a different one. So, this version of tailgating is it's similar to the car one, where you know, like tailgating in a car is where
Or
you
do you
drive.
mean like driving right behind someone?
Yeah, so
That's okay.
in
Yeah,
terms of cars, that's what it means,
yeah.
right?
So that's the
But,
other word. Yeah.
mhm. What happened in this situation was your man opened the door to his own apartment building, and then a black man walked in the door behind him without like pressing a buzzer or anything like that, right?
Right, right, right.
Um, so that is apparently another term for tailgating. I had never heard of it used in that
Yeah,
context, but it
never
does
heard of
kind of
that.
make. So what happened after that is the guy asked him who was he there to see. So the white guy asked the black guy, "Who are you here to see?" And the black guy refused to answer. And the white guy called the cops on him and said, "There's a man here who in fairness, you could see that race was at least part of the
I
story
remember
because."
this story. No, I remember. I actually remember this exact story.
So is it older than a week?
Older that well, that well, I remember a very like same exact story from like 5 years ago. But
Okay.
anyway, yeah.
Um, so basically, what happened was the guy was there in a very legitimate manner, which probably should have been apparent considering he didn't make any attempt to flee or to talk your man into not calling the cops. He was like, "Yeah, man, go ahead, call the cops. I'm recording this. You're going to be all over the internet next week, and this is going to be really embarrassing for you." And then the black guy's friend comes along, and in fairness to the white guy, he went red as fuck. but but in a way, I kind of sympathize with him um, because it is possible that he would turn around to anybody and go, "What the fuck are you doing? This is a secure building. Get out." Which like it happened off camera, but I I think both of them say that happened, right? That he was told to leave, and he said no, and then he was asked, "Who are you here to see?" And they both agreed that he refused to answer. One of them felt that that was grounds to call the cops, and the other one felt that he was perfectly within his rights to refuse to answer. Now, I feel that what that could have been resolved without the cops, right? You go, okay, I don't need to know who you're here to see, but you need to stay outside until your friend unlocks the door. I think that's quite a reasonable approach to take for somebody who lives in it. I think if you live in a secure building that has a coded door, or a fob or something for your door, then it's everybody that lives in that building's responsibility to keep that door secure, right? And so I don't think he was wrong by challenging the tailgater in this instance, but did he jump to go call in the cops? Possibly. He hadn't exhausted all of his opportunities without calling the cops. Like, it was almost reflexive. Could he have tried to gauge your man and go, does this guy look like a fucking thief? Or is he, comfortable in the confrontation? Most thieves will just fucking run if they get, if they are confronted about anything. So if a guy is standing there perfectly comfortable going, "I'm not answering your questions, but what I am here for the right reason," just weigh that up and don't automatically go to the cops and go like. and then when he did go to the cops, he was like, he appears to be an African American. It's like, come on, man. He's either an African American or he's not. Like, it's like, But so
So I have some thoughts about that.
yeah,
Um, there's this idea of having to prove yourself when you're black that you don't have to do when you're white. Um, you say, yeah, it's the responsibility of everyone in that building to make sure that building's secure. In theory, sure, but would that guy have done it if the guy behind him was white? I'm gonna say no. Would he even have challenged him? I would. I'm gonna say no. And
I would say you're probably right, but
and then there's
you
this
can't jump
idea
down
of
this guy's throat.
and then
Like,
there's this idea of having to prove yourself, right? So like this idea that why are you here? You don't belong here. Uh, if it's an area that's mostly white, or if it's an area that's mostly white, why is this black person here, right? Like there's been a lot of videos circulating recently of like delivery drivers or random people
yeah,
being in like mostly white
that's
neighborhoods and
crazy.
people
You're
harassing
in a
them.
fucking UPS van. Like nobody should be asking you questions. Full stop.
Yeah,
Like if you're in a delivery van, just leave the man alone. He's doing his job.
but even just being a person in a neighborhood, why do you need to prove yourself, right? Why do you need to, right? Like like it's not that one person's responsibility to to question someone who's coming into the building, right? Like, is it your right to to you know, like hypothetically, yes, that's where you live, but should you be calling the cops on someone who's there waiting for you? Number one, should that be the case? Number two, should the person have to answer, oh yeah, I know, I'm here to see blah blah blah, he's blah blah blah? Like, why should he have to prove himself when he's just there to see his friend? Like, he's living his life, why does he have to go out of his way to prove that he belongs in this space, right? So that's kind of, I think that's like that's probably the issue that's here, right? Why do people need to prove themselves when, as we kind of talked about last week, this segregation of white and non-white was not an accident. It was a deliberative pattern of legal and non-legal, violent and non-violent government and private citizen actions that's accumulated over
Yeah,
hundreds of years, right? So this idea that, oh, you don't belong here is just another another kind of step in that direction, right? Like, you don't like, prove yourself. You don't belong here, prove yourself because you shouldn't be here, is kind of that mindset, right? And that's why I struggle to think that that guy would have called the cops on him if he was white, right? Like, there's obvious signs of,
can I just
yeah. I want to hear what you have to say about that.
so just um, the closest that I uh, particularly live, like okay, I have lived in a complex like that. So at the back of our complex was a homeless shelter, and as a result of that, the security in the area was pretty high. You'd have like razor wire and high walls and all of that kind of stuff to just keep. Like if I walked out of the gate to my complex, I could point out like two or three homeless people without just by going like looking up and down the street like that. People that had been turned away from the shelter because it was full. And like when my so on two separate nights, my friends came over on their own after town because they like didn't want to pay for a taxi or whatever. So they were like, "Oh, I'll just crash on John's couch," and I gave out to them because it's like this is a fucking dangerous area. Don't be walking around here at 4 in the morning, um, uh, like you know, on your own, drunk off your face. Like both times, the person was very, very drunk. I never had to confront anybody in that house or in that apartment, but I definitely would. Almost all the people in the block were foreigners. I knew a lot of them to see. I was friends with about a fifth or a sixth of them. Like, you know, not friends, friendly. Like, you know, that I'd say hi to them or whatever. Right. It was only a small block. It was like 24 apartments, and I knew I was actually friends with like a couple of people, so I knew their housemates and stuff like that. So like, but I definitely would have said something if a particular looking person tried to walk in that gate. Now, the particular criteria wouldn't be color related. It would probably be more along the lines of clothing or I suppose things that I would typically associate with being homeless, because, you know, there is opportunistic crime going on in that particular area. That's not actually the example that I'd use. There's a community alert area in almost every rural part of Ireland. On our road, we have a number that you call at the top and bottom of the road if you see anything suspicious, and it will be investigated. And the reason that's there is because, so our road is a through road, and you can go, like, you can continue 20, 30 miles, however far you want in both directions. There would be some flow of traffic on both sides. But most of the vehicles that come down this road are neighbors, and most of them would look familiar to me. So when I see one that doesn't look familiar and maybe is like slowing down outside of every house, I have followed them in the past. Every time I followed them, I've decided, oh, that's actually, that person just pulled into a well lit up house, got out and rang the doorbell, and I just fuck off, like, you know. And my dad has done similar, but he actually stopped and asked them questions, and they've always answered. Now, I'll just say this: there's no black people on this road at all. There's no Asian people on this road at all. It's a very homogenous. What's the word? Homogenous.
Yes, yeah.
Place. And it's always been clear enough. Like, you know, I don't know if any of my neighbors have reasonably called the community alert. We've never called the alert. We have asked, like others in my family have asked questions. That questions have been answered. There's never been any issues. I don't think it's that unreasonable to have a community kind of spirit and kind of look after your neighbors and things like that on face value. Obviously, when it delves into you're using a fucking racist reason to harass or attack somebody, that is a problem.
And I think the immediate escalation to the police is also like an impulse that maybe a lot of people have, that is this sort of subconscious racist element of like, now you're going to get what's coming to you, you know, like that people have, instead of trying to
fucking lynch mob.
Yeah, instead of trying to actually figure out what's happening in that situation, it's an immediate escalation to an institution that's been known for overusing force and using force in these situations against black people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah.
And I suppose that is part of the that is part of the element here as well, is that like when I call the cops, I know they're not going to unreasonably fucking shoot somebody because most of them don't even carry guns. over 90% of cops don't carry guns in Ireland.
In Ireland, yeah.
Now, that's not to say that they're all fantastic people. Like, some of them are jackasses, and some of them do abuse their power or try to. But it just doesn't have the physical or potentially fatal element that
Well,
the
yeah.
ears do.
But that's, yeah,
And
that's,
I would say even if they're all no, sorry, even if some of them are jackasses, they're not racist jackasses. I don't believe anyway that they're racist jackasses. Maybe they are. Obviously, I haven't experienced it because I'm a white guy.
yeah,
But
hard to
the
say.
but the people that I do know that are minorities have never alluded to me that the cops are racist in Ireland. So
I mean,
that
yeah, it might be a different experience in Ireland. Um, but yeah, and that's the other part of the police in America. Everyone's armed, and
yeah.
you don't like that. Increases the lethality of an interaction so
Mm-hmm.
much. You know, it's like one of those things where if you have a gun in your home, you're I think like 40 something percent, 43, 42 times more likely to be shot by a gun than someone who doesn't have a gun in their home, right? Having it as an option, it
Right.
makes something just that much more lethal in general, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
Well, we like. Uh, I think most countries think that America are just cracked. Your gun laws are just stupid. Like, there's no other word other than stupid.
yeah, but
Um,
that's getting into like our cultural, uh,
yeah. Yeah.
our unique,
Yeah. Exactly.
our
That's it.
unique
Hey,
culture and history.
yeah. Your approach to your constitution is absolutely unique.
Yeah, it's very
But,
it's interesting. Yeah, no, it's very selectively applied and utilized approach to the Constitution,
yeah.
where some matter a little bit more than the others.
Mhm.
Yeah, um, yeah, I did see some interesting things today on how uh, the I think the FBI or some law enforcement body in the United States has been approved to use social media videos to prosecute people who have participated in protests um, in the United States. And that, I think, raised a bunch of issues for me, not least of which is our First Amendment, which includes the right to peace, the right to protest. And yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, this is a completely different direction that I'm taking this, but it's kind of a slippery slope of using this ubiquitous technology to as a law enforcement tool.
I,
There's been a
I
lot of
don't. I haven't heard about this before, but I don't see too much of a problem in using publicly accessible uh, videos or whatever to prosecute somebody.
yeah,
But prosecuting a protester is fundamentally wrong. That is
right,
what dictatorships do.
yeah, yeah, and
So,
that's the question: is where will that line be drawn, right? Um, Yeah. So I actually had something that I wanted to talk to you about because it's been on my mind for the past couple of weeks, and I think it's been talked about a lot. And that's the idea of
right,
removing statues of historical figures.
right,
And I have a lot of things
yeah.
to say about this, um, but I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts because you have
Um,
a different perspective than I do on some of these monuments.
yeah. It's funny. This has been a conversation, not necessarily in Ireland too much, but in the UK, So Winston Churchill is, we were talking about the start. Oh wait, no, sorry, we were talking about him before the
Before we
recording,
started recording,
and
yeah.
yeah, and he is one of the most reviled people in Irish history. So for those that don't know, he was the Minister of War or something in World War One, and then he was the Prime Minister of the. I'm sure everybody knows him as the Prime Minister of the UK during World War Two. And yeah, so he is responsible for ordering the Black and Tans into Ireland, and generally a horrible human being. And he was also a rampant racist.
So
From
sorry, for people who might not know, what does that mean? He sent these people into Ireland.
So the Black and Tans were there's a little bit of myth around the Black and Tans. So the traditional idea is that the Black and Tans were like half of them were criminals and soldiers with PTSD from World War One and that kind of stuff. And basically, he took the worst of them and just unleashed them on Ireland.
When was this?
In after World War One, 1919 or something like that, 1920. I think it might have been 1920 that he actually signed the order. So the Irish War of Independence had started. It wasn't going away the way that other Irish rebellions had done, but it certainly hadn't caught on to full effect either. And what the Black and Tans did, regardless of who they were before they came into Ireland, they were murdering people left, right, and centre who were innocent. They just killed people on a whim. And their directive was to bring terror to the terrorists. So the IRA were seen as terrorists, and the IRA and IRB were seen as terrorists, and Winston Churchill's approach was, let's fight fire with fire. Except the people that they terrorized were people that were often not involved in the war at all, and that drove so many people into the arms of the freedom fighters. And so he's from an Irish perspective, he's a terrible fucking person. From a lot of Africans and Indians' perspectives, he's a terrible person. From a World War II perspective only, if you take that block of time, he's a hero. So those are kind of the main parameters that we have to assess him on. It's on the one hand, he's a terrorist. Sorry, not a terrorist. He's a war criminal.
Call it whatever you want. Yeah.
On the other hand, he's a hero. Yeah. So it's pretty hard to weigh it. Like, where do you draw the line there, and how much bad cancels out the good that you do, or how much good does it take to make up for all the bad you've done? Honestly, I would hate for any directive that tear down all the statues. I'd be so against that, because there are people that contributed a lot more than they took, and I on a personal note, I would not necessarily be against Winston Churchill's statue remaining. If it was in Dublin, I would say tear that shit down and fucking get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't our hero, but he was one of the people that saved London from the Nazis, right?
Right.
And and I don't think it's really permissible to be too black and white about these things. You can't just go, oh, he stood for this, um, and therefore he's an awful human being.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean,
just the
I
same
think
way, like Genghis Khan.
in some
Sorry, go on.
cases,
Yeah.
it's an easy call, right? In like
For sure, yeah.
if you what you were known for was owning slaves or transporting slaves, is what you were known for was fighting for the Confederacy, blah blah blah, something like that. That's a pretty easy call, and yeah, and
And even like, um, so in terms of the American side, like General Lee was against naming forts and things like that after him. He didn't want it. He was like that, that's going to keep old wounds open. We should not do that. Okay, obviously I'm paraphrasing, but
a lot of
but
these
but there is a
monuments
quote
were
out
put
there
up
along
in
those,
like the 1920s, though, in
or
1910.
or even later.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
way later.
around the time of the civil rights movement, like a
Yep,
lot of them were put up.
yep.
So like that absolutely should not have happened. Anything that was put up this century, definitely take it down. Um, I, I, I don't, I don't particularly like the idea of taking somebody like uh, Robert E. Lee and just going, he's uh, an absolute villain and painting it in this black and white. Um, like, okay, he fought for what I would consider the wrong side, and I think the majority of people now would agree was the wrong
Who is
side.
this?
Robert E.
Robert E.
Lee,
Lee. Oh, yeah.
yeah. Um, uh, and like any statue that was uh, commemorated well after his death, like in the fucking 1900s, that should not have happened. And now that it has happened, it should be undone. Because I feel like those statues were not put up to commemorate him. They were put up to show the black man that's your fucking place,
Yeah.
you know? Um, whereas I wouldn't, on the flip side of that, the ones that were put up, like, if his hometown had a statue of him, like he is probably the most famous figure to ever come out of that town. And like maybe there could be an argument there. I'm not like
So
a major
this is where
philosopher.
I kind of defer to the impact argument, because I've talked about this with other friends of mine, actually, about how Robert E. Lee personally, you know, was probably like was probably less racist than all of the other Confederate generals. His personal views might, like, he was against slavery. He personally, and he did blah 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 blah, right? Like his personal views, whatever. The problem
Right.
is that, like we were talking last week about adjective versus adverb, right? Fighting for a country that its whole purpose is to continue slavery is a racist act, right? And if that's your overarching legacy, is fighting for that, then the impact is that we're honoring this person whose legacy is one of the main generals for the army that was seeking to keep people down. And if you talk to
Like,
uh, a black
you're not a
person
sum of
today,
your words, you're a sum of your actions.
yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Like he may personally not have been as problematic, but his actions were so problematic that it pushes him way over the edge. And I think if you talk to
Right.
most black people, they would say the impact of having him on that pedestal is too great and is demeaning and insulting and blah blah, all the adjectives, right? And and the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, people use the argument that taking down a statue is erasing history, right? And that's
I've heard that. I've
that
heard that
is
debate.
probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because number one,
Yeah.
history happened whether or not there's a statue of it. Number two,
That's not true. No, that's not true.
well,
Like that. Oh, I agree with you that that taking down a statue is not erasing history. But the idea that history happened whether you talk about it or not, that's not true.
okay, that's
As soon as
not fully true, but to some extent, the history happened, right?
yeah.
Number two,
I think it's really dangerous to do a
not
lot of things that erase history.
I'm not saying don't talk about what happened. That's the thing, and that's
Right.
what people don't understand. Taking down a statue is not saying don't talk about what happened. In fact, I think people who are arguing for the statues to be taken down would want this to be talked about more, because the history shows that this guy was on the wrong side of it. Like
I think like a lot of those statues should be taken down. Maybe not destroyed, but taken down.
Yeah, I'm not saying destroy the statue.
Some of them definitely could be destroyed, like the ones that were done in the 1930s, 1940s. Just get rid of them. Like, melt them down and make them into a statue of somebody that was doing something at the time to bring America into the 21st century, right? So at that time, there was lots of things that was going on. There was the all black fighting corps,
Tuskegee Airmen, yeah,
like
yep,
yeah. You could bring any a statue of any of those people that were heroes at the time.
Hundreds of examples, yeah.
Yeah, oh, so many. It was like the 1940s was the last age of heroes that we have. Like that's still a really black and white way of looking at things, but like World War II was probably the last war that was fought that you could say there was good guys and bad guys. Okay, there was still war crimes committed by the Allies.
Well,
side.
but that's the thing, is that there were
like
bad guys on the good guys' side. If you want to take that, like the Soviet Union was not good guys, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. But there's a fantastic part of Saving Private Ryan where they stormed the beach in Normandy, and you see all that brutal part of people with their legs blown off and their stomachs hanging out of their chest, and apparently, like the at the time that premiered, there was a lot of vets from World War II that had been invited to watch it, that they had gone to the premiere, and that they were invited to the to meet Steven Spielberg, I think. Isn't that who did Steven Spielberg?
So yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Or to a private, it might have been before the premiere, it might have been to a private showing or something like that.
Right.
They were like, this is the closest that cinema has ever gotten. Like, you only caught 1% of it, but it's the closest that cinema has ever gotten to showing what it was like.
Yep.
So anyway, they storm up the beach, and two Germans pop out of the trenches and kind of go like, "Oh, don't shoot, don't shoot." They say it in German, and it's not subtitled. So what they say is, "Don't shoot, don't shoot. I'm a Slovakian, I think."
Okay.
Right. So they're like, I don't know if they're speaking German or if they're speaking Slovakian, but basically they say like, "Don't shoot, I'm not a German." Right. And the Americans, who obviously don't speak German, go, what, and then shoot them in the trench, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that scene, but they pretend that they can't hear them, and then they gun them down. That's a war crime.
Yeah.
To shoot a surrendered person.
Prisoner of war. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so eloquent, a surrendered person. But like that kind of stuff is like I think it's fantastic. Like once you know like the little bits that go into those kinds of movies. But sorry, I went a bit off track there. But it's that kind of stuff is good. Like you know, it's 90% of people don't know that stuff, and
Yeah.
um, and like when Steven Spielberg put that in, he probably didn't even intend for anybody to know. It was just his own little flair that he wanted to throw away. And but it does demonstrate that there were uh, uh, even though the rest of the movie is done as like these are the good guys and these are the bad
Right.
guys,
Right.
um, and like there were, it kind of shows that the lines were great
Yeah.
once you actually know
Once you're
that
in it.
bit of backstory. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And like a lot of movies like so I think Saving Private Ryan was 1994 or 1995 or something like that.
One of those.
But as time has passed, like movies have gone more into that like morally gray area, um, and it's just seen as whatever more palatable. That people today don't like the idea of black and white. That's why Game of Thrones is so successful. Like you know, it's that everybody in Game of Thrones
Is
is kind
that
of living in this
yeah?
gray area. But
Because they're all terrible.
yeah, yeah. No, nobody wants a hero anymore. They want
Yeah,
like
the
like
anti-hero. Anti-hero. It's all about the
everybody
anti-hero.
everybody hates Superman and loves the Punisher. Like you know, but
Yep. Yep. Anti-hero. I'm telling you, it's a thing.
oh, the Punisher is fantastic. But so so um, going back to like the statues and
Yeah. Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. Um, the idea that you could take somebody who has done even bad things, um, like I don't like the idea of taking somebody like Robert E. Lee and just going fought for the Confederacy, no, and just tear down all his statues across all of the U.S. I think every single one of those needs to be taken in the context that it was put up. And there needs to be some room for uh, black people to go, this statue is contextually and culturally relevant. Now, I'm not talking about that specific example. There might be no cases where Robert E. Lee's statue is contextually and culturally relevant. But what I'm saying is you can't just go no to all of them and do that across the board with everything. You can't do it with Churchill. You can't do it with, I don't know, who else. But like you need to go, it is offensive for this statue to be in this place. Tear it down. You could certainly turn around and go, all the statues need to be moved to museums or something like that. Wouldn't be a bad idea in the world that we're living in now. Just to like for like I don't want to be made aware that my ancestors were slaves every time I walk into work. Right? That is a reasonable statement. That like
Yeah. That's
um,
something. Yeah. Yeah.
so having all the statues out of sight might be uh, a very valid claim, but I think just automatically destroying them all is not.
Well,
Um,
I don't think anybody's arguing for. Well, maybe some people are, but I don't think most people are.
some extremists are.
Some people are arguing for destroy all the statues. I think it's it's the idea of what a statue in a public place is, right? When you put up a statue, it's not really, you can put a little plaque on it, but in terms of contextualization, what a statue is doing is saying this is a person that we're honoring. right?
Mhm.
And it's like a blunt instrument. It's there, it's in front of you, it's you see it, and your whatever your association is, that's what you get, right? And I think that's why people are arguing, even for these guys who may have shades of gray, what is the impact of having that blunt object around?
Yeah.
And what is the impact on different people, right? And I think it's fair to it's fair to acknowledge that these are not totally black and white people, because no one is like okay, very few people are 100% in one direction, right? People live in this shade of gray, but what does that statue do to people now, right?
Mhm.
What does it do to people? It reminds people of this time. It reminds people that people are glorifying this time, right? It's not just about that person themselves, is why is this person here? You know, this place or whatever wants to honor that person. And what does
But
living,
why were the majority of these statues erected
yeah, yeah,
decades or more after this
after,
person's death?
exactly, yeah, what is the message of
Like the
that?
majority, like
Yeah, yeah, no, the overwhelming majority.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, like regardless of what, like I'm just going to stick with that one example. I feel like that's an easier way to approach
yeah,
this subject. Um, but like the people who are erecting Robert E. Lee statues are doing a disservice to the legitimate memory of Robert E. Lee. So I don't know who'd be necessarily wanting to remember Robert E. Lee for legitimate reasons, maybe his family or something like that, right? Like just just as a there are people that would legitimately be remembering him, people from his hometown, right? Um, but he specifically asked that nobody fucking erects a statue of him. So you're doing a like uh, you're
dishonoring his
dishonoring
memory. Yeah,
his memory. Yeah.
and his wishes.
So
Yeah, yeah. That
for the
particular
sake of something
example,
racial.
yeah, yeah, is quite ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's yeah, but this it's tough also with history because um, you know, for example, with Winston Churchill, we didn't learn anything about Winston Churchill being a bad dude or being a racist or oppressing oppressing Irish people or oppressing African people or oppressing. We didn't hear his quotes on how colonized people deserve to be colonized by superior people. We didn't get any of
Yeah.
that. All we got was he was the hero who led Britain during World War II, gave really great speeches, blah 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 blah.
Funnily enough, that was the story that we got of Winston Churchill as well in
Really,
school. In school, yeah. Is that like the only time you hear of Winston? Like we were taught about the black and tans in school, but we were not taught that it was Winston Churchill that ordered black and
oh,
tans into Ireland. Um,
see, there you
so
go.
they have a similar or had a similar system that the PM could sign executive orders essentially, and uh, and yeah, he was the one who put his name to it.
Yeah, and
Um,
yeah, and so it begs the question: is the real problem the history that we've all been learning, the official version of the history that we've been learning, right? I mean, I think especially in terms of what's been going on, people have been kind of digging back and learning about things that they had no idea about in American history, at least. I don't know about you, but they're learning a lot of things about America's very racist past that's making them second guess what they thought they knew about the history of America. And I think
yeah,
that that's important too, that the full story be out there, right? Like, regardless of whether you're conservative, liberal, like libertarian, blah, 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 anarchist, whatever, you're you should not be fighting against history and what happened, because regardless, what happened happened, you know. And if you're not saying things that happened in order to build a narrative, you are undercutting your narrative because you're telling a lie essentially. You're not giving the full context. And I think that that's what we started with this podcast,
Yeah.
and probably what we'll have to end with, because I have to go in a few minutes.
All right.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
just on
yeah, yeah.
on that
Say yeah,
Winston Churchill topic, we were talking before the podcast about that as well, where a person that I know had mentioned um, the an English person had mentioned the Winston Churchill conversation and how his statue should be removed and all of that. And they used some examples as to why they felt that the Winston Churchill statue should be removed from outside Parliament. Um, so the examples they used were basically that he had persecuted people in Africa and India, and like he has made so many statements about the British being the superior race, and very kind of Hitler type, Hitler-esque, we'll call them, statements. Um, and yeah, so and the person who posted those two things, so they just said Africa and India, and then a couple of the statements that he made. So I sent them a message and I said that he also ordered black and tans into Ireland, and looked down on Irish people as an inferior race. And the response I got was actually surprising. They knew that, like, it's actually a reasonably rare thing for a British person to know how horrible England has been to Ireland in the past. A lot of them don't know.
yeah,
But this person did know
yeah.
and had seen that in the original post. So she hadn't even shared the entire post. She had just shared portions of it.
Really?
And so I was wondering, like, why would you cherry pick? Like, it felt like cherry picking to me that that she had decided that these 2 points, the points that focus on Ethiopia or wherever it was in Africa, and India, these two parts of the story demonstrate my point the best. So she shared those, and then she left out the Irish part. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. One is that you can't pick and choose the parts of history that tell your story for you. That's kind of like what the Young Turks was doing at the very start of this episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second thing is that what is racist changes over time. So
absolutely.
Back in 1910, the British from their point of view, thought that the Irish were stupid and inferior, and they weren't looking at our skin. They were listening to our accents and stuff like that. When we went out to the States in the actually for about 100 years, Irish people were seen as the lowest of the low, lower than a fucking
the thing
slave,
is
like
that
in some cases.
Because I wish we had more time to talk about it, but yeah, it's true. And Irish people were not even seen as white in America for a long time.
Yeah.
But yes. continue what you were saying.
Um, so, like, if you killed a black man, there was repercussions. They weren't like, it wasn't murder because the black man is property. But if you killed sorry, it was property. But if you killed a white man, sorry, an Irish man rather, it was just like, oh, shit, that happens. And obviously, as time goes on, as time went on, rather, Irish people did like I don't experience that, right? So obviously, at some point in history, it stopped being like we stopped being the oppressed and went into the category of being the privileged.
Yeah. Yep.
So what people who are telling these stories of like you know, like it is absolutely fine to point out that Winston Churchill did his part in killing thousands of Africans. Absolutely fine to play your part in showing that Winston Churchill killed thousands and thousands of Indians. But if you're telling a story, tell it properly. And I think when you go down the road of cherry picking, you're actually doing a disservice to everybody, because what you'll do is people will take you less seriously, for one, and I think it actually contributes to the polarization of every conversation around race. It makes it harder. Like, what everybody should be doing is trying to close the gap, bring the people on the far right, that's my left hand, but bring the people on the far right into the fold and go, you don't need to be out there. There's a middle ground that we can all be happy on. Maybe not a middle ground, because but we can show you the way, put it that way, right? Rather than seeing them as an enemy that needs to be pushed away, which is only going to reinforce their little fucking bubble and make them even more isolationist, So.
Well, yeah, I mean, like if you're talking about far right, there's a lot of what they believe and espouse, which is, I mean, pretty much polar opposite of what people. So, and it's very upsetting, racist, blah 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 things. But what I do want to say, and the last thing I think I'm going to say because I'm out of time, is the irony of this person that you're mentioning, uh, not using that example, is that I think that only bolsters your argument that Winston Churchill was a bigot, because he was bigoted against the Irish, as well as non-white people. Like, it doesn't make it any better that he was also, like, it doesn't make him any less racist that he was also bigoted against what is seen as white people. Like, that only makes him more uh, more offensive, worse. And I
Yeah,
think that only contributes to your argument, if anything. So that's why that person's argument confuses, or the omitting of that information confuses me.
I think it's really key that like racism changes over time.
It is,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
you
true
know,
too. It is true. You're right. And who has been seen as white has changed a lot over time. Actually,
yeah,
nowadays we like to see it as, you're white, it's skin tone, but that was not the case for a long time. And
yeah,
it's still
yeah,
not the
sure.
case now, to some extent, and we can talk about colorism and different things, but that's actually all my time.
Shades. Mhm.
Yeah,
All right, man.
you want to sign us off?
Good. Yeah. So, um, if you have any comments regarding the topics we covered today, leave them in. You can either message us or leave a comment in the comment section below, and uh, the more out there, the better.
Yeah. Hit us with
So
anything. Hit us with anything.
yeah. We're hardy enough. If you fundamentally disagree, absolutely start an argument. I'd only be too willing to write back. All right, man. Enjoy your dinner.
Cheers. All right.
Bye,
Thanks
guys.
to our viewers. Thank you, John. Goodbye, everyone.